Hey everyone, today we're talking about something very ironic. If you're not as familiar with the criminal justice system and kind of the guts of the entire machine, right, like I am, this is going to be ironic and entertaining, so sit back. I'll share this a little bit of insight with you guys. First, before I get started, one thing I like to point out, this is not legal advice. I'm not an attorney. I get my knowledge and credentials, and I use that word very loosely, credentials from it's all based off of my experience. If you're new to my channel, you probably don't know this. So I was wrongfully convicted for first-degree murder, spent 12 years incarcerated. 10 years of that is when I was really grinding. Spent 10 years just working hard. There were no days off, there were no weekends, there were no holidays. I worked incredibly hard and represented myself towards the tail end of that, represented myself for 3.5 years, had almost 30 hearings, 13 of those were evidentiary hearings, presented about 100 exhibits. I mean, it was incredibly difficult. And right at the end, I had an attorney that came in, helped me negotiate so that I could get my life back. So Scott Williams, shout out to Scott Williams there in Lehigh. So let's go ahead and talk about this a little bit. So the topic today is jailhouse snitches, jailhouse rats are not who you think they are. When I say jailhouse rat or jailhouse snitch, what do you think of? What do you think of? What comes to mind? What do you visualize? What image comes to mind, right? Probably somebody who's shy, awkward, quiet, you know what I mean? I don't know. I mean, for each person, it'll be a little bit different, right? I can go on and on and on, but you get the idea. However, one of the interesting things that I learned, and it was towards the tail end of my time, right, being incarcerated, right, where I learned that, ironically, right, a lot of the jailhouse snitches, right? And by the way, they get punished pretty bad. So just so you know, generally speaking, right? There are exceptions, but generally speaking, I mean, if somebody's a jailhouse rat and they, you know, people know they are, there's violence coming their way, right? And depending on what prison you're in, and depending on any number of other circumstances, it could be pretty bad. I witnessed a guy that who had his face and neck completely slashed with just a prison-made knife, and it was pretty bad. It was gruesome. There was blood everywhere. And there was nothing anybody could do, right? When I say that, I mean the officers, right? I think there was one officer, but he couldn't. It was just too many people there. It was two large groups that were involved, but the one guy, right, that was the alleged snitch, is the one that got his neck and face slashed, and it was pretty gruesome. So it's bad, right? If you're a jailhouse snitch or rat, it can be pretty bad. I've seen where some of them, right, their stuff gets taken, everything they have. Others, what will happen is that they'll have to pay rent. So what I mean by rent is every week or every month they have to pay a certain amount to somebody, right? In order to be able to live there and not get beat up, right? So all sorts of consequences. It could be all bad. So it's pretty serious. But what I learned towards the end of the time that I was incarcerated is that, ironically, you did have some of those snitches, right, that fit that profile, right? Kind of nerdy, geeky, or maybe just awkward, or just socially inept. I mean, any number of adjectives, right, and things you can throw out there. But that wasn't always the case. In fact, it was interesting because towards the tail end of that, what I mostly saw was that the people that were the rats, the jailhouse rats and the jailhouse snitches, were actually dudes that you would never think are actually the jailhouse rats and snitches. There was some of these guys that were doing this, right? So towards the tail end of my incarceration, what I discovered was that a lot of times, most of the time, right, the snitches were these guys that were either gang members or affiliated with a gang, or they were affiliated with a group that was well respected, right, within, prison context. And then sometimes they were just people that were big, aggressive, kind of violent, people that maybe in the past had been known, right, for inflicting and perpetrating some of that violence on other people that were allegedly jailhouse snitches and rats, and they become that. There's a couple of examples that come to mind that are pretty clear, that come to mind, and just to give you guys just kind of, an example. One of them was this big giant, Polynesian guy that I lived with, who had, one of the best jobs at the prison, and not only that, but all tatted up, was well regarded, well respected, right? He was affiliated with some pretty powerful groups, and he was a rat. He was a rat, and then when it slipped out, right, when he said some things that made it clear, right? I just was listening. He found a way to justify it, to rationalize it. So interesting, right? Second guy was not necessarily well regarded and well respected. This was just a big dude, right? He was the biggest guy in the entire building, you know, at 6'5", 300 plus pounds, and, you know, worked out and all that stuff, right? Every day. And anyways, but that dude ended up being a rat, you know what I mean? And you know, he had his reasons for it and whatever, but it wasn't like, and he was very violent, right? He was an aggressive person. In fact, right before I left, right before I was released, I watched him get into, you know, probably one of the craziest fights that, you know, that I saw during my entire 12 years. It went 4 rounds, which is usually doesn't happen, right? If you know how prison fights usually go, it's 1 round and then everybody gets locked in, right, and it's over. This one went 4 rounds. Last 2 rounds were out in the open, and it was this big giant dude against this little guy. The little guy whooped his butt. It was crazy. Like, so the point is that he ended up being a rat, you know? But it's interesting, right? Because that's not what you think. One thing I'd like to finish off with, right? Because you're probably wondering, well, what's that jailhouse rat or jailhouse snitch, right? What do they snitch about, right? Because if you're not familiar with the, you know, with the inner workings of the system and kind of what life is in prison, it could be a number of things, right? It could be you have a lead pencil and you're not supposed to have lead pencils. It could be that maybe somebody is selling their medication to be able to buy some, you know, some commissary, right? Some food. So they're selling their medication, whatever that is, right? Or it could be that somebody maybe snuck in a picture, you know, of some porn or something, right? And, you know, somebody, right? Or it could be somebody brought in a cell phone, right? And you're not supposed to have cell phones, and somebody brought one in. Or it could be, I mean, any number of things, right? Any number. Some of them are just not as big of a deal, and some of them are a lot more serious. So, but there's all kinds of things like that, right? That happen within prison, and it's ironic that a lot of times, like I said, the ones that are the jailhouse snitches and the rats are actually the guys that, you know, you would think are the tough ones, right? The tattoos and the big, you know, aggressive, violent ones, and sometimes they are the ones that are the rats. And I know this from personal experience. Like I said, the last few years I was shocked to see this. That's not to say that every single person that fits that profile is a snitch, right? Obviously, but it happened quite a bit. You know what I mean? It happened quite a bit. So it was interesting. Just a little insight, you know, something interesting, more for entertainment, right? Some insight into the life of, you know, being in prison. And I think honestly, you know, my experience was here in Utah, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case in other states as well, right? Where it's that irony exists, right? That irony of who's actually, you know, pointing the finger and cooperating and collaborating with the officers, right, to bust people on different little things. Good or bad, your judgment call. Something ironic, interesting, entertaining. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in my next video.